start the recording and go from here. Tonight, I want to do several things, and I know I just got word from Lauren that she won't be joining us tonight. She is not well, she's sick, and then Danielle won't be joining us, I don't expect, tonight with things going on with her. So hopefully we'll carry on, and we may have a shorter than expected class tonight for that reason, because we only have about 3 or 4 presentations. Adrian did accept the invitation, so I expect her to be joining us here momentarily. But tonight, I want to start off by discussing Finland just a little bit, all of us, and then we're going to hear about your countries with presentations that you have to make. And then I want to begin the conversation tonight about PLCs, talk about those in preparation for what we'll be doing in a couple of 3 weeks as we start looking at those chapters. And then we'll talk about assignments for this week. I kind of kept it a little light tonight because of the new technology. We may try, I would like for you to see the Shanghai video. I know you watched your own Shanghai, I think is one I'd like for you to watch, because they did score the highest on the PISA test in most recent tests. And so I want us to look at that, possibly if we can make that work tonight. So that's kind of our game plan tonight. And I want to start off by talking a little bit about the Finland phenomenon. And I want to open the microphone, so I'm going to turn all of you on if I can. Let me see if I can do that. Well, you'll have to turn them on, I think. It's not letting me do that for you. So if you'll open up your microphones and have a little bit of conversation about this. I enjoyed reading your discussion posts on Finland. Very good. I thought you all had some good things, some things that I had not even thought about myself. And first, I've got a few questions I want to just talk about. And these were ones that what I would have used if we'd have watched it in class together last week. But, each of you take a minute and describe what you saw, what impressed you the most of what you saw from the video. Who wants to go first?
I will.
Okay, go ahead, Jean.
I think the most impressive thing to me was the level of trust that they built over time, and it existed in every direction, from what we saw at every level, down to the point that they had no longer had teacher evaluations. Students had choices in high school, how long they wanted to graduate, how long their day was, even if they wanted to go to school. And that's what impressed me, because I sometimes feel like that's a huge missing component for me, or what I see daily with teachers, and the lack of trust, and their lack of trust in every level.
Yeah, and it seems like that just is mushrooming and getting more and more all the time. I remember back when I began my administrative career at the central office, had a new superintendent came in, and I went to the central office with him pretty shortly after he came to the school district. And one of the things he did was give out a poem about trust. And I've got it in my stuff, still in my file somewhere. But he really emphasized the notion of trust. And I think that every time I see this video and think about Finland, that just comes back to my mind. It is a critical factor in Finland, and I think it's important. So good. Who else? Next person.
I'll go next.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
I say the thing that really impressed me the most was the fact that teachers were treated like professionals. Even with my staff teachers, I'm always challenging them to see themselves as professionals. And it's a challenge in our country, because anytime you read the newspaper, anytime you look at TV, it's always talking about the things that the teachers aren't doing. So a lot of times teachers don't feel that they're craftsmen or they're skilled at what they do. They don't see themselves as professionals. I think sometimes they forget that they are licensed by North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. They are certified and licensed to do what they do. And I think that sometimes they forget that they are professionals. So to see the time and the effort that was put into the teachers not only being treated as professionals, but the work that went into making sure that the skill set was there to produce a good product in the classroom.
Good, good. Sharon?
Yes, I was very impressed by the teacher education program. They had the years they had a, and I like they had the exam. They had their entrance exam into the profession, into it, and it's practice that we take, I guess. Did like that. But one thing I also enjoyed is that once they passed that test, they still had to have more training. They had to sit under master teachers and kind of learn, and they were able to critique and work with teachers. And I love the collaboration that the teachers had, because I know a lot of times teachers do not like to share. They like to keep things to themselves so they can be, have things that they can say, hey, it's my baby. I did this. And so I like the fact that they're able to collaborate and question each other and support one another. And I just love the teacher education program. I think it was just an amazing and like I said before, very extensive training. And they only choose the best of the best to teach certain subjects. And I thought that was great too.
Well, every time I see this again, it reminds me, I think of the medieval times. We had the apprenticeship kinds of programs, and that's really what they have in Finland. I mean, and I remember reading in your discussion post that you said, that was the most profound thing to you. I do think it's a significant key. And we see that, and I don't know what you've seen. You've all had a chance to look at least one other country. Many of these countries have that as a component of their reforms or their change or their improvements. At least the way they're attacking education now is through a teacher induction program that's a lot more robust than we have it. We tend to think, we've got these mentoring programs and things that are fairly new in their intensity in schools, but they're nothing compared to what they have. And so I was pleased that you brought that out. Okay, Adrian, what did you take away from it? Are you there? I see an icon on there. Can you unmute yourself and talk to us a little bit about what you saw?
Hey, yes, we're talking about the Finland video, correct?
All right, yes.
What I found to be I found the whole entire video to be very enlightening. One thing that I really enjoyed was the voice and choice, so to speak, that Finland offers to their students in terms of how long they go to school, in terms of if they want to do 2 years versus 4 years. And basically that choice that it allows them to sort of buy into their own education. And one other thing that I really and truly enjoyed was the fact that they have a complete vocational education system or track for students to be able to follow. And I feel like by having that vocational track, they are able to keep a lot of their students, and they don't have a huge dropout rate, because we all know that there are students who will benefit from moving on to a 4-year college or 2-year college, so to speak. And then we know that we have those students who know that that is not the option for them. And I think we do here in the U.S., in some of our districts, we are doing our kids a disservice by not offering a vocational track for our students, because we have those ones who just say, you know what, school is not for me, this isn't the thing. But I feel like if we had that vocational track, we could really capture those kids and get them to graduate, therefore increasing the graduation rate, which seems to be a lot of our, one of the things that we trying to achieve across all districts is increasing the graduation rate. And I think taking that vocational piece out sort of added to it. So I was really pleased to see that, they had that complete vocational educational track for students and had a curriculum for it. that allowed them to capture those kids who otherwise did not want to take the academic track.
Do you remember, any of you remember in the video, any conversation about graduation rate?
I know that at the end, Tony McBride, he said basically what I was thinking when they talked about that vocational piece. He talked about how, I don't remember specifics on what the graduation rate was, but I do remember him saying, just think about how many kids you'll be able to save with that vocational piece here in the U.S. But I don't remember. And I wrote down so much. I did not remember seeing that or hearing that particular rate.
I don't think any of the Finns talk about graduation rate in the video, and that doesn't mean that they don't think it's important, but it's just
right.
It's not the emphasis that we have on it here.
It may not be an issue.
Yeah, I think their emphasis is that we're assuming that everybody's going to graduate.
Mm-hmm.
They're differentiating the way they graduate, what we call the culmination of their experience, but everybody's going to graduate. That's good. I want to go back through now and ask each of you to talk about the thing that you talked about most. And it's interesting, as I read your discussion posts, everybody kind of focused on something a little bit different, and I want to kind of highlight what I think was maybe one of the big things that each of you talked about. And I'll try and go back through in the same order we went through. Jen, you talked about trust as being a big factor. And I want to ask all of you the same question. We talked last time or time before last about reform, and reform implies that something's wrong, it needs to be fixed or improved, that whatever the initiative is correcting some deficiency, but it's something that's an essential piece of the structure will remain. It's just correcting a deficiency. Whereas change implies that something will be different, that the state of the in the simplest form, we're moving from one state to another. And so, Jen, you talked about trust. Do you see trust as in the Finland situation? Do you see that as a reform, as a change, or neither?
I think the idea that they need the idea to change, it started off as change, and as they started making progress, they made reforms, because they talked about it taking 40 years. So I guess I envision, and I don't remember anything specific, but just hearing that it took that much time, and they emphasized the trust at the end of that time, that they initiated change and then made reforms as they went, as they progressed, to increase, to reach their goals.
Okay, good. And Kevin, you focused not only on what you said tonight, but you focused on several things in your post. You did talk about teachers as professionals, just like Sharon did, but one of the things that you talked about was parents taking ownership. Did you see that as being a reform or a change, that ownership piece of parents there? And they did interview a couple of parents and talk to families. So what do you see there?
I think it was more or less a reform. I think it's something that the methods changed over time, because it required buy-in. So I believe that at the time that the change, well, not the change, but over time, things transition. I certainly don't think that it's something that happened immediately, because there were so many other things that were being shifted around to get the parents to buy into the different things that were being done. So I definitely think it was a change of mind or a reform over time.
Okay. All right. Sharon, you talked more about the teacher education, the teacher induction, the teacher training. Change or reform? What do you think?
I think it may have been a reform. I think that they probably had that in place already, but I think over time they just I guess you could say, like you said earlier, they made it more, that word you use, I can't remember, but it was more intensive.
Yeah.
So I think it was more like a reform, because they always had high standards anyway. So I think they just reformed it to make it even better, more tight.
Okay. All right. And Adrian, what about the emphasis on vocational ed? You think change or reform?
I'm sorry, I missed it.
If you highlighted that vocational programs were an emphasis there. Do you think that what they're doing with vocational work and with vocational programs is a change or a reform or neither?
I think it was more so. I don't know that if they've never not had that, because they talked about, their post industrial sort of society. So I believe that I want to say it was a reform or something that, that was always sort of there.
Okay. I do think probably, in my view, and again, there's no right or wrong answer on this. I mean, it's certainly each person's opinion. I think certainly the trust piece is a change.
Mm-hmm.
I see that as being transformational. They're going from a state of, I guess if we had that trust in the United States, it would be transformational. We would change the schools from one state to another, but from a transformative state kind of thing. But I think there are a lot of reforms there. I guess another question I had, is there anything that any of you saw in the video that Tony Wagner would suggest is a reform that you think is not necessarily a reform, or something that's really more of the same? They're just doing it a little bit more, a little bit differently. Is there anything that you felt like, that's not really a reform? Anything? Well, let me ask it, maybe extend it a little bit. Is there anything that they considered a reform that you feel like we've adopted or we're trying to do in the United States?
I'll speak to that, because I did notice, I noticed some things. For instance, when they talked about in the very beginning how kids go to school at age 7. While we're not doing that yet, there was something that sort of stuck out, was that they have the same teacher for several years. And so they get to know that teacher and that teacher's style, and the teacher actually gets to know the student and their learning style. I found that very interesting, and I think it stuck out with me because my children, my son is in second grade this year, and so for pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, he had the exact same teachers, so they practiced the looping sort of thing. And he was with his first and second grade teacher, or his kindergarten and first grade teacher, for 2 years, and he'll be with his second grade teacher throughout second and third grade. So I found that very interesting, in the fact that they are, that practice is sort of coming into play. I don't see that, and have not seen that at any other school other than the school that my children attend.
So is that a intentional program, or is that just?
It is. It is very intentional for that very same reason. They get to know that teacher's learning style, the teacher or teaching style, and to sort of get them acclimated to one sort of person instead of change every single year. And that teacher may have a different teaching style, and it sort of makes it difficult for students to adjust and to do well. And they really believe that has an impact on how well their students do. And for me, I'm sold on it, because they're a very high performing school, and that sort of thing, and it works well for them. And I've seen, even with my son, that it's been great for him to know who he's having for the following year, and to sort of get adjusted to that teacher and that teacher's style of teaching.
I contend that probably works when you've got high quality faculty, and you've got people that parents want for a second year. I would say, if you're in a setting where, you've got some marginal teachers, and they're, you all know, having been in school administration, there are times when we have teachers that nobody wants. And if
That's right.
Then looping becomes a real issue. But
Mm-hmm.
it seemed as though they took looping to a even greater extreme or greater emphasis than we do by doing it more than 2 grade levels.
Right.
We talked about that and I told you all I'm teaching 706, which is essentially the same content as we're doing here in 614. And somebody said that, and they said, well, something about we don't do looping here. And I said, well, we used to. It was called the one-room school. We had the ultimate in looping at one time when we had, you had the same teacher for maybe 10 or 12 grades. But again, I think it all goes back to if you've got a good teacher. I think, back to your point, Sharon, I think, what they're doing to strengthen the profession and strengthen the quality of teaching is a key to being able to loop more than a year or two, because I do think it's a disaster if you don't have that. I'm not sure, and somebody pointed this out, it may have been you, Sharon, somebody pointed out that the notion that they have, 6,000 people for, I don't remember what the number
is. It's 1,600 people.
Yeah.
1,600 candidates, and they pick 10% of those, yes.
So with those kinds of, quality and that kind of exclusivity can bring, I think, they can certainly be assured that they're going to have really high quality people in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else that had a reform that we're doing here that you saw a piece of?
I saw, when I was looking back through my notes, it said that Finland believed that teachers are not assembly line workers. And when I read that, that made me think, the old school way of a teacher standing in front of a classroom and the students just sitting there receiving the materials, how we are working hard to move away from that in our observation assessments, looking at changes in the strategies, methodology to get the students more involved with small group, student-led conversation, student-led lessons. So just not a teacher being robotic or training robots.
Yeah. We'll talk about that again in a little bit when we talk about PLCs and that kind of that manufacturing mentality that we have in schools. But that's exactly right. Good point. Anybody else? Something that we're doing?
I think a piece. I don't think we're seeing it full blown as they're doing it, but I think we've got pockets of choice that have begun. Everything from magnet programs to charter schools, and so that's creeping in. It's not full blown as it is in Finland. And then also some things like the Common Core standards, where the focus is on teaching kids to think and be engaged actively. We see that and hear that more now.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. What are we not doing that you saw in Finland that you think we could implement here?
I would love to see teachers be more open to observation, like the teachers in Finland. And it is, it's been unreal to me as an administrator how teachers really hoard, their lessons, or they're not open to any sort of feedback, and it's like, how dare you tell me this is what I'm doing, and not from an administrative standpoint, but from a peer standpoint, from peer teachers. I feel like teachers would be able to benefit from being able to observe other teachers at practice, even in their own discipline. So what I do as an English teacher was totally different than what one of my colleagues was doing down the hall. However, me observing her observing me, we were able to kind of gain insight into how we were able to reach students at different levels. if that makes sense, or how to reach students or teach students a certain skill. And she had a strength and I had a strength. And we sort of worked with one another, but we were open to that. And a lot of teachers aren't open to that. They teach with their doors closed. They don't want to, it's almost to have other teachers to come in to even observe what they have going on. And I wish more teachers were more open to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I saw your passion in your post on the discussion board. You said some teachers almost dare anyone, all caps, to provide any constructive feedback. And I do think there's that sense at times. There is not the kind, at least in my observation and experience working with teachers and administrators for a while, there's not the kind of openness to critique that there seems to be in Finland. And I don't know if that goes back to the trust factor. You all have seen it as we've gone to a new evaluation model. Some of you have been doing this for a while, and that the model doesn't assume that it assumes proficiency. And it doesn't assume that people are, at that top level. And consequently, we've had some teachers who've just been incensed. What do you mean that I'm not doing that? Well, the rubric looks different, and it says you do not only these things in this column, but you add these things and add these things and add these things until you are a master teacher. And so, very, very interesting. Anybody else want to comment on one of the things?
I think I'll just piggyback on what Adrian said. I really think that we're hurting ourselves with what we're doing with the vocational track, because not everyone is college material. But I think that the trick part about it is to find someone that maybe is interested in auto mechanics or electronics, and they'll be so caught up in that trade that they'll end up graduating with an associate degree and won't even know they're graduated with an associate degree. I don't go to college, but and on the vocation that they ended up achieving both when they were only focused on the trade.
Yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. Anybody else? Let me ask one more question, then we'll go on to the countries here in just a minute. What do you think needs to be different in the United States before, and pick one of the reforms that you saw there, before it could be implemented? Tell me one of the reforms, and what would we need to do differently before it could be implemented? What do you think needs to be different in our schools and the culture of our schools?
I think one of the changes that would need to happen is the backing off of compliance to rules and regulations, and because that and giving more autonomy back to schools and to parent decisions,
that will tie right into what we'll talk about in just a bit as we talk about the PLC. So good point. Who else? Something you think needs to be different before one of these reforms can be implemented in the United States?
Well, one thing I think, and I don't think they mentioned it too much in the Finland video, but I think teachers should be paid more. They should be paid what they're worth. I feel like, I know they're moving more to the merit-based pay here in North Carolina, but I think that teachers overall should be paid, at a higher level, because I saw how they were revered as the same status as lawyers, doctors, nurses, and I feel like in the United States, teachers are not revered to that level. And if they were revered a little bit higher to that level, I think teachers would be more enthusiastic. We wouldn't have the turnover rate, and we would have them teach until they retire, just like they do in Finland. So I think that's one thing we need reform here.
I think, and one of you may have pointed this out, or a couple of you pointed out, I think that the population is so much more homogeneous there. You don't see in Finland, from what I've read, you don't see the really exorbitant salaries that we see here in some of the professions like lawyers and doctors. They're certainly a little more than teachers, but they're not, so much dramatically higher than teachers. When they showed, I think, what was it, 45,000 versus 47,000 maybe was the the comparison. They're not being paid tremendous amounts more, but in the value of their wages, it is a good wage, more so than it is here now. And we have our legislator bickering over whether they're going to give us 1, 2, or 2%, and whether we're going to go from 33,000 to 35,000. And it's as though if we get 35,000 for an entry level teacher, that's going to be some huge amount. It really is not. When you think about $3,000 a month, it's not a lot of money for folks. So good point. Any others? I do have to point out one thing that Kevin said, just because I thought it was funny. I don't know if y'all read it. This is great. I love this statement you made, Kevin. It is amazing when people say, I understand the plight of teachers. I teach Sunday school once a month. That's a quote. I may put that on my office door. I like that. So that was great. Well, any other thoughts about Finland before we go on and talk about some other countries? Anything that anybody wants to talk about or bring to the discussion? It's a great to look at Finland. I've got here in just a minute. We can look at it as we talk about the countries in the videos. Finland has slipped a bit in the PISA test over the last couple of years. They're still in the top, I think, 6 or 8, but it slipped just a little bit to some of the Asian countries. And several of you, I think we've got maybe one Asian country tonight, and we're going to be in the Finland region with Belgium and Netherlands, and then we're going to go to South America and then Canada tonight. But I think, well, actually, we won't go to Netherlands because Lauren's not here. But the things that are happening as it relates to these countries, it's changing. It's very competitive, and we see what's happening with the PISA test over time. So with that said, I want to turn to the countries and let you all talk to us about those. And I want to do a couple of things with this, or at least not with the presentations, but I want to see, just for my own benefit here, how it works with you all doing Zoom, so we can get a little practice there. So if it doesn't work, I've got a plan B here. Jan, I'm going to go in alphabetical order for these countries. So we'll go with Jan with Belgium, and then Adrian with Brazil, and then Sharon with Singapore, and Kevin with Canada. Lauren had Netherlands, and she sent me her PowerPoint, but we'll wait and try and pick that up next week when she's with us. I can show you the PowerPoint, but I'll let her do the talking about that rather than me trying to do that tonight. But we'll go through them in that order. And Jan, you sent me a PowerPoint. I want you to go ahead and bring that PowerPoint up on your screen, and I'll share the screen with you, and let's see if we can see it from here. If not, if it doesn't work, then I can certainly bring it up here because I have it online. So let's see if we can do that. So can you bring it up, Jan? Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
So
All right. All right, let me share the screen. Let's see if I can share it with you. I think. See how this works. Y'all be patient. I'm still learning this too.
I saw it where an email to open it.
I think this is the version that I had it loaded for you. So let's not waste too much time with that tonight.
Okay.
Can you manipulate that? Can you show it?
Let's see.
Let you do that?
It is not.
Okay. Let's see. Let me see how I can do that here. Hang on just a second. Well, we have operator error on this at the home office. So let me just go ahead and show it. And Jan, if you'll just tell me the high sign, can you all see her presentation there? Say Education in Belgium.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Jan, if you'll just tell me when to change it, I'll change it. I'll be your person tonight. Okay.
Okay, go ahead to the next slide. The title of this video was Strong Performers and Successful Reformers in Education in Belgium. I think the interesting thing about Belgian education, it consists of 3 federal regions or ministries, and those 3 regions are based on the linguistics of each of those 3 communities: a Dutch Flemish community, a French community, and a German community. The Belgian Constitution, let's see, I guess next.
Okay.
The Belgian Constitution, and I left a word out there, guarantees freedom of education to all citizens. So any person, group, or entity can start a school, and that could be a private individual, government, municipalities, or church groups. There are also the schools that are there they have public schools, pedagogical schools, religious schools, private schools run by private individuals. So a wide variety of operational or who is responsible for the schools. Okay, next slide. This slide just shows the difference that compares responsibilities, the government and the school inspectorate versus school responsibilities. In Belgium, the government determines the attainment levels because they do testing every year for students, which is different from the Finland model. The government determines attainment levels, and they determine where the final attainment levels, whether those attainment levels are reached by each school's curriculum. There are checks on site to determine whether their final attainment levels are in fact achieved, and if those are done yearly, they have a team of led by a school inspectorate, a team of people who are with the school for a week, and those teams, without political influence, make their decisions on attainment based solely on the data. They also never rank schools in Belgium or select things like the 10 best or 10 worst. And they invest funds, whether it be a parochial school, a private individual school, a pedagogical school. The funds are, all of those different programs are funded by the government. The school responsibility has the autonomy to make decisions and determine the school's theme or focus. Each school is responsible for quality. They determine curriculum. They determine objectives of the curriculum. They test their students yearly. They're responsible for marketing their schools to get students, to have students and keep students. And they also, when they have their meeting with that team that visits with them, they're also responsible for their plan of correction, how they're going to correct their deficits. Okay, next slide. Parents also have the option of choosing a school for their student, their child, and it's based on the school philosophy, what's best for their child. They can choose any school regardless of location, and they referenced one parent passing 4 or 5 schools to get to their chosen school. Different siblings can attend different schools based on the needs of the individual child, and there's a strong involvement of parents in their child's education. Okay, next slide. I actually went to the PISA test just out of curiosity in Belgium, and I think that the testing occurred this year, but the results are not there. But I highlighted Belgium. They are ranked 15th in the last results that were.
This was 2012, I believe.
Yes. Ranked 15th, and United States was 35th. But I just thought that was interesting because I wanted to know more. I know nothing about the test, so I was curious about it and just wanted to do a little more research on it.
I don't know if you saw it. I believe if you went to the PISA site and got this chart, which I have got it to show tonight if we get a chance to look at Shanghai. I believe there's some sample tests or some sample questions on their site that you can take a look at too.
Yes, I just kind of went through the site just because, again, I was ignorant of the test and still don't know a lot, but it was interesting to see because they do a lot of, they provide a lot of data on like male gender data, age data. There was a wealth of information there. Okay, and next slide. And just comparing to the United States, I think one of the things that stood out to me, the United States has begun a form of the school choice, and I mentioned that earlier, through magnet programs and charter schools. Barriers to us here in the U.S. are politics, philosophies, and the belief in who is responsible for education and what is mandated in our federal and then our state and local laws, policy, and constitutions. The reimbursement of parents for attending private schools in North Carolina is maybe kind of touches on the idea that the state pays for all forms of schooling in Belgium. Barriers to full implementation, though, again, are politics. Where does the money come from in the end? Philosophies, equitable attainment levels or testing issues, and then the lack of respect and trust in educators to do the right things. Also, I think significant to me is the strength of politics in education. When Belgium, they are very quickly claim that politics has nothing to do with education in their country. And then something that could be very similar in the inspection process, the advanced ed that we go through is in many respects similar. But again, there's a lack of, the barriers include the lack of consistencies from even across the state, much less across the United States. And then the last slide is just the future. I think what was indicated to me was the citizens, the students were happy with their educational system. But when I saw the PISA results and that they have also fallen in those rankings too, I would expect their competitiveness to rise to the challenge, help them rise to the challenge to reforms that will push them back, move them back higher. And I think their reform initiatives, the positives about their reform initiative involvement, the lack of influence that schools have, compare schools to one another or their students to one another. School cultures were described as personal and warm, and the schools are responsible for coming up with a plan. They don't have a government agency come in and take over to change what was happening and for improvement. It rests with the school themselves. And I guess the biggest unknown factor in all of this is the worldwide economy. You know, what effect will that have? And that's unknown for everybody, for every country. And that's all I have.
Okay. Any questions from anybody for Jan? Good job of giving us a good overview of what's going on in Belgium. Anybody? Questions?
Very good job, Jan. I think that one of the things that I picked up the PowerPoint, the United States is so competitive. And you mentioned several times that the parents had a choice, but there was not competition to see who's number 1, number 10. I know in the United States that would be difficult because we pride ourselves in who's number 1. So I know that, I mean, even if you look at schools of choice, it's all about being competitive. So that really caught my attention, that they were able to have choices but without competition.
Right, and I think they mentioned in the video, they mentioned the marketing. The schools are responsible for getting students in their program. And I think most of the schools, they're small also, not as small as Finland's, but they don't want their schools having more than 400, I think it was 425 students. So they do maintain the small personalization, I guess, of a small community, school community.
I've had a chance to visit in Belgium, and it is a different community feel there. Obviously, in any European country it is, but there is more of a sense of neighborhood community, I think, in their schools there. You know, it's something, it's culture, a little difference there. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, let's go south to Brazil. Adrian, you ready to tell us about Brazil?
I am. I do not have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna talk to you about from the notes that I have here. So with Brazil, just before 2000, well, actually, prior to the 1990s, education in Brazil was strictly for the elite class. So if you weren't a part of that elite class, then you didn't partake into school unless you could pay for it and that sort of thing. So it wasn't until universal for in education in Brazil. Once they implemented this change in who they allowed into the school systems and who they opened it up for, they didn't allot for the resources. So here, in 1988, you're opening up access, you're making it sort of from the Brazil Constitution, you're allowing all students to be able to take access or have access to education, but you're not allotting for those students who are coming in. So that was one thing that they actually had to look at. They had to look at how they were going to spend for students. So in 1998, they spent $956 per student in primary school, and then they spent $1,069 in the higher education. And so when they went back to maybe look at that to say, okay, we have all of these students, however, the resources that we have available are not lining up with that, they had to go back, and then that amount per student actually doubled for primary and secondary students. So that was sort of the first thing that they had to do when you're looking at change. You have to just, so many times we say, okay, we're going to do this, but you don't allot for the resources that are that come with it. So the year 2000 was a year of change for Brazil. It was the first year that they took part in the PISA test. And of course, when they received the results from that, it was horrible. They did a horrible job, and partly because they didn't have the resources available for the students that they had actually allotted to join the system. So they did horrible. Their dropout rate was horrible, and so they decided that, okay, we've got to do something. And so what they did, they started to, in terms of doubling that per student amount, they decided to focus on one focal point. What is it that we're going to do? Instead of having all these different initiatives and these different goals that they wanted to take part in, they actually came up with one focal point. And that focal point was, reading. And and literacy for students, and ensuring that all children were able to read. And when they started talking about reading, they talked about how it wasn't just one of those things, okay, their reading test scores are low. It was, it was horrible because students not only were they not able to read the text that were there, they weren't able to read words. They weren't able to read phrases. And so they had to work on that one focal point as to what it is that they could do to increase that. And they talked about what they decided to do is when they started to go into these different schools, that there were two things that they had to focus on. First thing were the students. The students. What are the needs of the students, and what can we do to get these students to a performance? So the second focal point then was the principal, and they talked about that it was necessary for the leadership to arrive to clean house. And when he talked about cleaning house, he meant that they had to come in. And not only should they be able to read the results of what was happening with their specific schools, but understand those results and create strategies going to work from those said results. And so they highlighted one specific system in Brazil, Cercia, and I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, but they are the 17th largest in the state by area and the 8th largest by population with 8 million. They are also one of Brazil's poorest states, and for years they were the lowest performers in education. And so in recent years, because of this reform and this change that they have done, they've actually they're now a showcase system for educational reform. And that's, by having that principal to go in, and they talked about how this principal, every single day, he starts with a welcoming ceremony. And that ceremony allowed him eye-to-eye contact, not only with students, but with teachers, but with staff members and that sort of thing, so that they can move forward within a year. He also talked about how attendance was one of the things that sort of prevented them from being able to produce any effective results, because students weren't present. And if students aren't present, they can't learn. And so they hired one specific person for every 200 days that they're in school to go into the classrooms, see who's present, see who's absent. She reports back to the principal. And from that office, they begin to make calls home. Hi, I noticed that, Sierra isn't in class right now. What is it? Why isn't she in school? So they really have a pulse of what's going on in the school. They keep their hands, on the pulse of what's going on in their school. And so with that one focal point on literacy, they highlighted how teachers, what they do, they have one-on-one sessions with the students. And so they have students to read to them. And whenever those students, when they have the feedback from the students, it's important to, give them that one-on-one feedback then, and how it's critical for teachers to be able to give them that information. This is what you're doing wrong, and how you can actually correct that. And it makes it it makes it better for the student because they have that information to be able to go from. They have that feedback to learn from and able to work on. So Brazil created the Basic Education Development Index. And so what that does, and they call it the IDEB, of course it's backwards, but this Basic Education Development Index, it includes data that is collected by the Ministry of Education about the performance of each school. And so based upon that data, goals are set. The principal sets goals for that specific school. And again, here, just like in Finland, they have this freedom to go and complete or come up with a curriculum that is, best for their students. And it's going to vary from district to district. It's going to vary from school to school because you're dealing with different things. And so it's so very interesting. Every week, the principals come together for an 8-hour meeting. And in that 8-hour meeting, they discuss the happenings at their different schools. And so, of course, you have, just like in any world, you have your schools that do very well, and you have your schools that aren't making any progress at all. And what I found so very interesting was the fact that when you have the 2 and 2, the disconnect there was the socializing and the conversations that these principals have among one another. Instead of high-performing schools speaking with high-performing schools, they paired these principals together with schools who are low-performing. And they say, hey, what do you have going on over there? What works for your students? And then they go back and they implement these strategies based upon the makeup of the school. So, of course, what works for one school may not work for others, but they sort of paired these principals together with similar backgrounds so that these strategies would have would be likely to work. And for the most part, they did. In 2000, the PISA test revealed that 56% of the Brazilian 15-year-olds and younger were at a level 1 or below. Well, then, going in and working this reform and this change, in 2009, and they reported that proportion fell just below 50%. And reading score increased from 396 to 412 in 2000 and 2009, respectively. Math scores increased from 356 to 2003 to 286 in 2009. And then the last tested area of science, it went from a 390 in 06 to a 405 in 2009. So what really helped these different districts was the establishment of goals and, taking into consideration the background of each school and each district, and then the freedom to create a curriculum and really work that curriculum so that it meets the needs of the children who are in those specific districts, in those specific schools. And in the end, it talks about how those teachers now take pride in saying that they're an educator. And in most cases in Brazil, it wasn't that way. It wasn't that way because they were producing students who were illiterate. They were just passing through the system these students who not only couldn't read words and phrases, let alone the texts that were required. And so it really changed the way that the attitudes towards educators in becoming a teacher, and how they take pride in saying, I taught, this student how to read, that student how to read, and they are able, and the words were, I wrote them down, they rescued the teaching profession. And that really speaks to the whole of Brazil because, you're going through school, but you don't know how to read. What are the teachers doing? You know that we get the brunt of that argument all the time. Although, we know that home comes into play and that sort of thing. But it was nice to see him talk about how teachers are now how teachers have rescued the profession because they're able to produce effective results. So unfortunately, I didn't have a PowerPoint, but those are my notes in talking about Brazil and the reform that took place there. And again, it really goes back to attitude. The attitude of, and we talk about how we can, what sort of reforms can we see here that have been done there. It really does go back to the attitude of people and how they perceive the education system and how they view educators and the respect and having the freedom and the autonomy to really teach and not have so many focal points. So here Brazil took one focal point and worked it and not 15 focal points and saying, okay, which one are we going to work on this time? So that really made a difference. And that's all I have.
All right. Brazil is an example of a country that really has tried to focus as opposed to doing everything all at one time. They've really tried to focus, as you said, on literacy and really goal setting and data-driven goal setting. So good job there. And no worry about not having a PowerPoint. That was not a requirement. Those of you who did, that's fine, but not a problem. Are there comments that any of you would make or questions for Adrienne about, since she's our Brazilian expert? Any questions there?
I just want to say it was just good. It was just interesting to hear how it was a progressive reform. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we're just so impatient. So I oftentimes wonder if we wouldn't change things every 3 to 4 years. I just wonder how successful we will be at some of the things we're trying to do. Every 3 to 4 years, mm-hmm. It changes. Mm-hmm. So before you can actually find out what's working and what's not working, there comes if it's not a change, it's a reform that's totally different than what you were doing before. Mm-hmm.
I told in the 706 class a couple of weekends ago, I said, I had a teacher one time, Kevin, that said, she came to me and said, it's hard to come up with something new to do every year. And I said, Pam, our job is not to come up with something new to do every year. It's to do the things we're doing better. And you're exactly right. I mean, we think we've got to have some kind of new program or some kind of new thing, or we're not making progress. And when the case may be that we've just got to improve the programs that we have. That's a good point here. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts or comments? Okay, good job, Adrienne. Let's go to Singapore. Let's move to Asia. Sharon, you ready to tell us about Singapore? You have to turn your microphone on.
Yes, sir.
There you go.
I have a PowerPoint as well. Do you want me to try to pull it up?
Try and pull it up. Let's see if you're luckier than I was with Jan.
Okay.
Tell me when you got it up on your screen.
It's ready to go now, sir.
Okay, let's see. Let me see. Should be able to, hang on. Still learning this program. Let's see. I was assuming that I would see it here. Hang on just a second. Should make you the presenter. Let me see. Well, let me. Let's see if this does it for you. Now, Sharon, do you have at the bottom of your, if you go to the bottom of your screen, do you see share screen?
Yes, I do. Do I need to click that?
Click on that.
Okay.
And then you should have a box that comes up with, that should show your PowerPoint somewhere in it.
I see it.
All right, click on it and see if we get it then. This takes just a second for it to do it. Are you having any luck there?
I have mine. Mine is ready to go on my side, but I'm not sure.
All right, you start. It's taking just a second. You started screen sharing. The question is, if you can get it on there, can I get the screen back from me later on? I got it. Does everybody else have Singapore and education reform?
Yeah, we got it.
All right. All right, Sharon, looks like you are on. Now the question is, when you get done, if I can get it back, but at least we got you going. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't get yours going.
Okay, that's the title there, and we can move on, please.
Okay, I think you can control it.
Can I control it? Okay, let me try. Okay.
Is it letting you control it?
Mm.
Let's see. Go to from the beginning.
Okay. Does everyone see about Singapore?
We got it.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to give you a little background information of where Singapore is, because Asia is such a big continent. So I wanted to just tell you, where it is. It's actually near Malaysia. It's off the southern tip of Malaysia. It's also located just east of Sumatra in Indonesia and west of Borneo. Singapore is a highly developed country with a strong economy, but it has no natural resources. Singapore is slightly smaller than the U.S. city of Lexington, Kentucky. However, they do have 5.3 million residents, and they're squeezed in the land's tiny mass of 274 square miles. Some education reform initiatives that Singapore took. After Singapore gained its statehood in 1965, most of its 2 million people were illiterate and unskilled. Young people had to be educated quickly, which resulted in the hiring of many teachers with little training. So the government, in turn, had to move fast to raise these standards. By the early 1970s, all children had access to lower secondary education. The basic beliefs of Singapore ministry is no education system can be better than its educators. And with that being said, they hire only 1/3 of all the applicants that come in year by year. And they take the top 1/3 of university students each year. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of how Finland does their system of teachers too. Teachers are now no longer considered the monopoly in the classroom. They are also considered as guides on the side. So they're kind of like just letting the students facilitate their own learning. Transformation. The philosophy of Singapore is for all new teachers to be first, a teacher of the learner, and second, to be a teacher of the subject matter. So what they were saying here is they want teachers to know how children learn. That's the top priority. They need to know what students use, how they cognitively develop. That's their first point. And the second one, once they learn that, they feel like all the rest of it will fall in place. As long as they know how students learn, they can teach the subject matter in a way that's very effective and engaging for the students. Singapore, however, is becoming a global city where the government emphasizes in a curriculum of international education. So they want to educate throughout the whole world. They want them to be familiar with worldly things that are happening. They do a lot of the media technology. That's how they do that. The key roles of the teacher education program is to prepare all new teachers to become deep believers of lifelong learning and to develop an appreciation for the in-service courses, which are plentiful. With the systematic approach, the teacher education program ensures that every teacher has at least 100 hours of professional development. And I thought that was very great. I think that was a very great initiative there. Teachers are required to collaborate with each other through the use of PLCs. So in Singapore, there is not really a choice. It's one of those non-negotiables. They have to participate in professional learning communities where they share and communicate with each other. A mentor is assigned to a new teacher for about the first 5 years. And that's a lot like the United States. We do have mentors for the first 4 years or so for beginning teachers. Implementation in the United States. Currently, Singapore boasts of 271 schools that have created PLCs. In the United States, many schools are proponents of PLCs, using them as mediums for teachers to exchange ideas and question one another. So that is something that's similar. The Singapore Education Ministry directors meet with teachers 12 times a year. This allows officials to hear teachers on the ground, allowing them to express their concerns and look for ways to support them. And I thought that was very profound that they would come out from the top, kind of something like central office, or they would come out and they would work with the teachers 12 times a year. That's really, and to me, a lot of time. That takes a lot of time to do that. So I think that was a reform that they really worked on to get that, to accomplish that. This would be great for implementation in the United States. Most beginning teachers have a school-based mentor with whom they would meet with once or twice a month. It seems rare that central office staff would meet with teachers on the ground 12 times a year. Having enough retired master teachers to accommodate all new teachers would be a heavy burden for the United States due to low state funding. So in a nutshell, that's kind of saying we just don't have the money to provide that same type of support that they have in Singapore. Beginning teachers having an off-site mentor would be very beneficial because it would provide support outside of the school and would free up the time of extremely busy administrators. So they would have another person there to help coach, because we as administrators, we coach our teachers, but to have another person that has done it before, someone who's been in the classroom, who knows it's, and now they're working as superintendents and different type of education officials, they're able to come and listen to the teachers and help them. I think that's something very great. And it would also help the administrators. It would give them another hand. Continue. An important concept in Singapore is how teachers are viewed. Teachers are viewed as high status members of societies compared to the doctors, lawyers, and judges. In Singapore, teachers are considered their most precious resource. 20% of Singapore's budget is used for education. Only the top performing students in certain fields like math, science, and reading are recruited to teach these core subjects. In the United States, teachers must be respected and revered in society before politicians will ensure that teachers are paid what they are worth. And I spoke to that earlier. The requirements of the teacher education programs in the United States vary from state to state. A more uniform method of teacher selection should be implemented by dispelling any loose stipulations. And what I think about that is that when you look at the praxis scores, there are different requirements for different states. You know, North Carolina ranks a certain way, and then you look at Virginia, New York, some of their scores are higher. You have to score higher in order to be successful as a teacher, to be chosen in the teaching profession. So I think there should be a uniform score across the board for teachers in the United States. Just like in Singapore, only the top performing students should be selected to teach American students. I think here in the United States, we are so desperate to get teachers that we just take pretty much what we can get in most parts. And I've heard from people in central office that said the field is really getting it's really hard to find good candidates now. You know, just listening, and I'm sure some of you all can attest to how hard it is to find good quality teachers. And when you look at Singapore, they're very selective in their teachers. So to me, it seems like their field is a lot richer. Future considerations. In 2009, I talked about the PISA here. They took the first time they took a test in 2009, they scored in the top 8 performers in the world. In math, Singapore scored a 562, and they were surpassed only by Shanghai, China. In science, Singapore scored a 542, where ranked them in the top 4 performances. The United States ranked in the mid to lower 20s in all areas. This is in 2009. Some other things that we can look at in Singapore: kids are joyful, education is engaging, and technology is used as a key tool in education. Teachers are constantly working together to create an amazing environment for students. Over the next 10 years, Singapore will continue to be a model country for the world. Just like the Singapore American School located in Asian Woodlands, other schools will model their education programs after Singapore. One thing that I noticed in the video, one of the videos that I watched, teachers must continue to keep up with new information or they will not be able to effectively engage their students. And that was pretty much all. And then these are just my references. These are some of the videos that I watched about Singapore. And that is pretty much it.
Good. Questions for Sharon or comments or thoughts? Anybody?
Very good job. I have to go back to what you were saying earlier, 100 hours of professional development. I think we talked about that a couple of classes ago, Doc, where we spoke about the professional development monies that was there and how it wasn't being used. I guess the powers that be didn't think it was necessary, and it's zero. It's pretty much zero now. So it's kind of difficult or more challenging to get that professional development in for us as professionals, for the teachers as professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Other thoughts, other comments? Okay, good job, Sharon. Thanks. All right, Kevin, you ready to talk to us about Canada?
Yes, I am. I do have a PowerPoint, but I'm going to save us the trouble tonight.
You know, we'll see. We'll get you there, Phil. We'll try now.
I'm ready to go, so I can go without it. I got
okay. All right.
But I'm going to take us to Ontario, Canada tonight. A place of reform. The thing that helps this place kind of stand out is that they have clear expectations. And we see here that becomes a challenge of not having clear expectations. And the goals are clear, and education is a high priority. And so there is a plan. And I thought it was interesting that they enlist people to the cause. The cause is to reach the goals, and the teachers play a very big part in getting this done and being a part of the plan. And they also spoke about the persistence that's used to reach those clear expectations. And what is the challenge that Ontario, Canada had that was under the microscope that they turned around? They have an influx of immigrants in Canada. 4 out of 10 students are immigrants. But in their country, diversity is not seen as a barrier, but seen as an opportunity. And I thought that was a key there. So a change for the better. They made a decision that they were going to acknowledge that there was a shift in the culture of the city, and that awareness of the challenges of diversity needed to have measures that were put in place to address those challenges. So to make things better, they actually have trainings and assistance given to the leaders and the teachers to address the changes in that particular city. And you'll hear me speak more about that later on. What was done to address these challenges there? They created a sense of oneness throughout the province. They had specific goals, and they looked at strategies that improved teaching, and they monitored the progress of those strategies, and they valued the feedback from monitoring in order to make the adjustments. And one of the things that they did was they set age 8, grade 6, age 15 as key assessment points to monitor the educational development of their students. And so whenever they check these students at these particular increments, if they were not on the mastery level at age 8, grade 6, interventions were put in place to address those areas that were not at the mastery level. And what they found was if they put those interventions in place at age 8 and grade 6, whenever the assessments came, when the students became 15, they maintained the mastery level because of the interventions that had been put in earlier. I thought it was very important that they stated that the results from monitoring devices, or the data that was accumulated from the monitoring devices, were made clear for the schools to be able to implement. We understand that that's one of the issues that we have a lot of times with all of the things that we put in place. If those results are not made crystal clear, it becomes difficult for the schools to know where to implement or how to implement the data. They also spoke about collaboration among the schools to have open discussions about what the schools were doing and how to do things better. So through the collaboration, the schools talked about the things that worked at their particular schools. And they identified the practices that were successful, and they looked at ways that they could replicate those successful practices at other schools. One of the key elements that they put in place was a student success program. And with this student success program, they would have one teacher from each school, and the focus was to assist the immigrants with their challenges in order to be successful in school. The immigrant students are looked at holistically because resource connections might have to be made to deal with issues outside of the school. And one of the things that they talked about was that the scores of the immigrant students and the scores of the Canadian-born students were equal. And it was because this program looked at addressing the needs of the students away from the school environment. A lot of the students that were immigrants would come to the country without either one of their parents. And so they would look at what needed to be put in place to help this student to focus on their work when they're at school. The student success teacher had more time to assist the immigrant students with their individual challenges. So they recognized that the teachers that taught the classes would not have the one-on-one time to spend with the immigrant students. So by putting this teacher in place, the teacher could go around and have conversations with the immigrant students to find out exactly how they were progressing, or to see if there was some way or some method that could be put in place to help the students to be successful. This program also called for weekly meetings with the school team, which consists of the guidance counselor, administrator, teacher, EC teacher, literacy teacher, to track the success of the immigrant students. So there again, there was a tracking device to look at how the students were progressing and adjustments were made. One of the very important things that I saw about this program was looking at what skills the immigrants are bringing to the country and how these skills can be enhanced. So they recognized that although they were coming into the country, there were a lot of skill sets that the students had that could make things better for the school, better for their community. So they wanted to look at ways that they could enhance those skills that they were bringing in and to make those skills even better. What the results showed was that from 2002 to 2003, which was before this program was implemented, 54% of the students met the provincial standards. 2009, 2010, after this program had been implemented, 68% of the students met the provincial standards. The high school graduation rate before this program was implemented was 68% graduation rate. After the program had been implemented, the graduation rate rose to 77%. And the results also showed in the 5 to 6 years the program had been in place, the achievement gap of the immigrants had been cut in half. And they also talked about one of the turnaround examples. One of the turnaround examples was one of the schools in town. In 2006, they had 18% of the students were performing at standard. In 2009, after the program had been implemented, 71% of the students were performing at standard. So there was an increase from 18% of students on standard to 71% of students at standard within a 3-year period. And the key elements to that was change in the methods of teaching, not using punitive methods, and the buy-in by the teachers and the parents to the changes. I'm predicting that in 2025, 5 out of 10 of the students will be immigrants. The assessment grades of the Canadian-born students and the immigrant students will continue to be very similar. And I'm also predicting that graduating immigrant students would choose the teaching field as a profession. And there will be more teachers that were prior immigrant students, thus adding to the transition success of the immigrant students. And I'm also predicting that diversity will continue to be embraced through the initiatives passed by those in authority in Ontario. And looking at the US, we can see from looking at the news that this country is in the midst of an immigration uproar. No one seems to be in agreement about exactly how to deal with this particular issue. However, I do feel that reforms within our schools could assist with improving the educational performance of migrating students. One of the many challenges with having students from other countries is the fact that schools are not properly equipped to support the change. I feel that everyone will benefit from using multiple forms of communication to assist the students with their transition to this country. So the focus has been on standardized tests, which leads to emphasize rote learning in English. Research and work needs to be done, I feel, on race relations and dealing with stereotypes, and also improving those race relations and dealing with the stereotypes that cause students to feel like they do not belong in this country. I think if we can find some kind of way through the initiatives that we pass to deal with that, to help the students that are migrating here to feel like they're a part of the melting pot, but at the same time look at the skill set that they're bringing here, enhance that, I really feel that we will be moving in the right direction. Do I think it can be done? I do, but I believe that it'll be difficult, because I believe at the top we have to make some decisions have to be made as far as changing the view of those that migrate here to the United States. And that's all I have to say.
Good job. Questions for Kevin or comments? I do think this conversation, well, first let me say about Canada. When you look at this one, when you look at this video, and Kevin had a chance to view it, probably the rest of you didn't unless you viewed them all, but Canada does not seem, their performance doesn't seem phenomenal in a sense. We kind of say, 77% graduation rate, and 68% passing the standardized tests. I think the context for us is what Kevin has done a good job of highlighting here is that influx of immigrants. They're dealing with a population that is changing and moving that is very unusual. And so they've done some things to stabilize and move forward. And so I think that's the value of watching what they do. But they are embracing the immigrants and really trying to deal with that in a positive fashion. And as Kevin has pointed out, Canada really seems to have at least equalized the performance of immigrants. I think that's something that we as a country are going to have to grasp and deal with, depending on who gets elected and what they do with the immigrant situation. I think the things we're seeing even in Europe now, we're going to continue to see people who are migrating to the countries that have a quality of life that gives them what they want. And Canada seemingly has done that pretty well. So I think it's worth looking at it, even though we would say 77% graduation rate. We're not pleased, wouldn't be pleased with that here. I think it is a positive in the Canada context. I think of all of these countries, as you've looked at them, there are things that some schools within our country, even many schools within our state are dealing with some of these issues like immigration and other things. Back to Brazil, for example, the financial situation that they've dealt with to try and increase per pupil spending, it's abysmally low there. But we're seeing some of these same characteristics that we're dealing with as we seek to reform. And I think that's, for me, that's the value of looking at these, is to begin to try and understand what people are doing in these various contexts that maybe we can do here. If time were not an issue tonight, we would look at the Shanghai video. I do want to assign all of you to watch the Shanghai video. We won't take the time to do it tonight because I do want to talk about PLCs and not keep you all too late tonight. But if you'll go back to that video list, you're certainly welcome to watch all the videos, and I provided them there to you. Provided Finland and all those links. That it may be of value to you. I know a couple of you talked about having had conversations with faculty members about these countries, and Finland in particular. I think that's certainly, if you want to go and look at them, I think that would be a good thing. I do want to bring up, let's see if I can, here it is. If you all can see this. Can you see the, hang on, the piece of results? Can you see that there? Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. This is the 2012 results. You can see, and the reason I wanted to bring it up is for you to see that Shanghai is at the top. Much of what you heard in the Finland video is going on, are some key components that you highlighted in the Finland video are going on in Shanghai. Namely, the most powerful piece, if you watch this Shanghai video, and I don't want to certainly steal the end of the story, but is this piece that several of you have focused on in your conversations tonight about teacher training and teacher induction, teacher mentoring. Shanghai is very, very much into that. That has been a big key to their work. You can see as you look, Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taipei, Korea, Japan, all of these top 7 or 8 are Asian countries. And so they are focusing on this seriously. Then we come down to the countries, Liechtenstein. I have been in Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Netherlands, Estonia, Finland, Canada, Poland, Belgium. We're seeing then in that region, certainly not Canada, but the others there on that northern coast, European coast, a lot of change there. But you can look at this. I will post for you this snapshot of the PISA on in week 3 in the week 3 folder, and so you can take a look at it. if you haven't already discovered it. Jan, you showed it, but others may not have discovered it. So you can kind of look at your country and see. But I do want you to look at the Shanghai video, and that's the point. If each of you will go back and look at that, I think that would be helpful to you. You're certainly welcome to watch the others, but Shanghai, I think, is a must-watch just to see that work that they're doing with the teaching induction piece. Okay? Good job on these tonight. As I said earlier, hopefully Lauren will be feeling better and be back with us next week. And so we'll hear about the Netherlands then. And I do want to have just a few minutes of discussion next week about what you see in the Shanghai video. So, jot down a few notes as you watch that, and so we can talk about that. Overall, the countries that you did have a chance to watch, is it, I guess, just from a process standpoint, is it causing you to think a little bit more about what these countries are doing and to think a little bit about how those reforms might relate to the United States? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, it does. I'm really starting to wonder, Doc, if there are some areas that we need to identify that we don't need reform, that we need change, because some areas it's just not working, because to continue to do things the same way and expect different results, we might have some areas that we might need to focus on and just go a totally different direction. Because as we look at where we are, and if we look at where we stand over the years as far as comparison, working right, something's not clicking.
Yeah, and some of these challenges are hard. I mean, trust. I mean, that's a hard ship to turn. And we certainly are not in a place in our country right now where we've got a culture of trust. And I do think places like Belgium, that reform that they're doing really does hinge on what they've done with trust there. I do think some of the things that we're seeing are in these videos are more doable. I think we could do more with teacher induction, but I think it was Sharon, you said, until we start valuing the profession more, and we have people, leadership that values the profession more, that one's going to be hard to do. I think it's doable, but they're challenging to think about implementing some of these things here. You can wallow in your self-pity over these things, or at least collective pity on them if you're not careful. So, but good thoughts there. Let me stop there. We can spend all night on that, and I do want to go on and talk just a bit about PLCs. And so let me go to that.
Thank you for cooking for every Tuesday.
Okay. Can everyone see the PLC PowerPoint up there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's go real quickly. I want to talk about PLCs, and this is kind of an introduction to what we'll be doing in a few weeks, in about 3 weeks, as you begin to talk about your various topics as they relate to PLCs. It was pointed out that, and I don't know which one of you did it, that your countries use PLCs. I think whether they call them PLCs or whether they're just de facto PLCs, I think it is a reform initiative that is being utilized. I think some of what we are seeing, particularly related to teacher professionalism in these countries, is really for all intents and purposes, they're PLCs. And I think you'll see that in Shanghai. You certainly see it in some of the work that's going on in Belgium and Singapore and some of these countries that are doing quite well. So let's talk just briefly about this tonight. Here's a quote. It says, "We are wise to believe it is difficult to change, to recognize that character has a forward propulsion which tends to carry it unaltered into the future. But we need not to believe it's impossible to change. We create ourselves, the sequence is suffering, insight, will, action, and change. You know, change is hard. Reform is change, and change is reform. I think before we can see, before reforms can really take hold and germinate, I think there has to be oftentimes change. And I think at times we have to see the state altered before we can implement some reforms. And so, that's important. I think PLCs kind of fit right into that conversation about change and about reform. Just brainstorming a minute, what previous reforms can you think of that you think have led us, and I think all of you probably have a good understanding of PLCs. We're going to get into looking at them kind of with a microscope as we look at the do for work. But what reforms do you think have led us to PLCs? Anybody jump in there? Can you think of any?
I think some of the curricular reforms and changes that have been occurring have, because a lot of the new curriculum requires students to do what we're not doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good one. Who else? Somebody else think of something?
I was thinking maybe some the changes to the evaluation.
Okay. Talk a little bit more about that. How do you think so?
I think that, even with the standard one, and it begins to talk about teachers showing leadership, the opportunity has to be given for teachers to show leadership and to implement those different ideas that you're looking for in those particular standards. So through the PhD, the teachers have an opportunity have empowerment in the school to be a vital part of the school improvement plan.
Okay, good point. All right. Anybody else? What barriers do you think have existed prior to the implementation of PLCs?
Go to your classroom and keep your ideas.
Keep those children down there and don't bring them to the office. I'm going to be taking my nap after lunch, so don't bother me. I think that certainly is a belief that's been there. Barrier.
I think at the high school level, a barrier has been that isolation. The idea, each teacher is in their own kingdom once they close the door.
Yeah. Well, and even going further there, Jan, I think, we and I'm a high school person. I think we're guilty of believing that, I know more about music than anybody else, and there's nothing that possibly an English teacher or math teacher could help me learn about, pedagogy, for example. And I do think we learn things. I've learned when I was teaching, my best friend was the physics and chemistry teacher, and I learned so much from him when I first started teaching about just so many things related to teaching that I was able to transfer to my music classrooms. But it's hard. We are in silos, and so I think you're exactly right. Any others? When you think about PLCs, what would be the keys to moving forward with PLCs?
I think we need to improve, increase, I don't know what the right word is, but have that teacher leadership, a recognition of, self-recognition of leadership amongst, within the school and outside of the school.
Yeah, I think back to the barriers, I think that's been a impediment, is that we've not had that. I think you're right. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's move on. Let's have a quick history lesson. I know I gave you enough history a couple of weeks ago on our first class, but I want to highlight just a couple of things. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds on this, but just going back, the context is important. we had the National Commission on Excellence in Education that did a Nation at Risk in 1983. I have it there for you. If you want to go to this PowerPoint and click on that link, you can do that. It's posted in the website or in Blackboard. You can go and take a look and see a Nation at Risk and take a look at it there and see what it says. But certainly we know that in 1983 that was an important game changer for us, and it brought out some themes. The notion that we were declining, that we had deficiencies, that there were threats to our country and threats to our existence and threats to our success. There were afflictions that were coming about on our country as a part of that, and so it was a time of kind of real concern. During this time of what triggered the excellence movement, it did offer a consistent direction or a consistent theme for reform, and I don't think it was a new direction for reforms. I think many of those things were already underway, but it kind of encapsulated or consolidated those reforms. It was really, again, not a new direction. It was just more of a focus and more of the same in this excellence movement. We had, started down this road earlier, and that's kind of where we were doing. It was use the word here, an intensification. It was intensifying those things that we're doing. Quote here: leading politicians and educators, as well those in the national media who cover education, use that 1983 Nation at Risk to reflect on the accomplishments of school reform, and we came to a starting conclusion. Edward Fisk said that there weren't any school reforms, and that was where we were in '83, leading up and into the days of through the days of the Reagan administration. The excellence movement was a top-down attempt to mandate improvement. It was kind of Sputnik, maybe on steroids. That whole notion of scaring our country into, oh, heaven help us, we are not doing what we need to do, and maybe we weren't, but it was really a top-down attempt of the most purest form, a top-down attempt to do that. It standardized some things. It began to rely on rules and regulations. That was the beginning of the end for local autonomy, because things were so dire that we had to do some things. And I would say that the movement was mostly a failure. We've seen some changes, but if you look back over that ensuing 30 years since A Nation at Risk, a little bit more, we've not seen dramatic gains. We've seen maintenance. We've not seen tradition or significant reforms or change. We came into the 90s and we talked about 1989 and 88 and 89 as President Bush convened the nation's governors there at Charlottesville and expressed 6 original goals for education that should be accomplished by 2000. And those, again, real quickly, were all children in America will start school ready to learn. The high school graduation rate will increase to at least 90%. At least that's one that we're fairly close to in our country, even though we're 15 years late getting there. American students will leave grades 4, 8, and 12 having demonstrated competency in challenging subject matter. That's the nexus, really, of what we're doing now with testing, that they will demonstrate competency in these subject matters. And every school in America will ensure that all students learn to use their minds well so that they're prepared for responsible citizenship, further learning, and productive employment in our economy. Number 3 of Goals 2000 was really the nail in the coffin that started where we are on the accountability movement. U.S. students will be the first in the world in mathematics and science achievement. We certainly have not achieved that one if you look at the PISA. Every adult American will be literate and will possess the knowledge and skills necessary to compete in a global economy and exercise the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Lord help us, we can't even understand what the rights and responsibilities of citizenship are, let alone anybody being able to exercise those. Every school in America will be free of drugs and violence and will offer a disciplined environment that is conducive to learning. Maybe we've moved the needle there. I don't know. We still have violence. We still have drugs. The things I'm reading now are saying that we're starting to see some decline in drug use. I don't know if that's true or if that's just I don't know as I read the research. And then by 2000, the nation's teaching force will have access to programs for the continued development of their professional skills and the opportunity to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to instruct and prepare all American students for the next century. Imagine, I can imagine that some of these countries that have done remarkably well on the PISA took these goals and did them themselves. Certainly, we see in some of these countries we've talked about tonight, other countries have mastered number 7, and they've gotten number 7 much better than we have. And then finally, by the year 2000, every school will promote partnerships that will increase parental involvement and participation in promoting the social, emotional, and academic growth of children. Again, we've seen some of these countries that we've talked about tonight and that you may view, certainly Finland and others have gotten number 8. And so it would seem that we published our playbook in 2000, and some other countries stole our plays, maybe. The excellence movement was a top-down, a standardization. The restructuring movement was national goals, a resurgence of local autonomy, although that has waned somewhat in recent days. But those were kind of where we were from a historical standpoint. We were restructuring to include site-based management and some meaningful authority over staffing programs and budgets, shared decision-making, staff teams with shared planning, and heterogeneous grouping in core subjects. This restructuring after the excellence movement is what it has propelled us into what may be called the PLC movement at some point. One reason the restructuring movement has generated hope has been the notion that we would all embrace it, and that's one of the things that DeFore says here in your text. And again, you'll get to that text a little bit later, but as you start reading about PLCs, he says, in spite of the utopian ideals, the high hopes of the restructuring movement have yet to be realized. We're not there yet. And again, DeFore's book is a little bit dated. Those are a little bit dated books, but I still don't think we're there. Studies of the impact of the restructuring movement have found that schools are typically focused on some minimal and marginal changes rather than teaching and learning. I think we're getting better. I think since DeFore wrote this, we've improved, but we're not there yet. And other authors are saying that we've really left the teaching and learning process largely unaltered. I think we're digging around the edges on PLCs, but I don't think we're certainly there yet, even though it's been a while. And just like the excellence movement, I think many of the restructuring things are faltering or failed, and that's just the reality of it. As we've moved into the accountability age, we've seen that it's been about one thing. It's been about 100%. No Child Left Behind was about and has been about, let's get everybody there. I think sometimes even at the expense of moving our brightest and best beyond where we want everybody to be. It has certainly been designed to be a minimal performance, a minimal competency is that everybody at this level, we've raised the level, but we expect everybody to be there. That's the minimum. But we've not elaborated what it looks like beyond that minimum. So as we've talked about reform and we've talked about change, there are some barriers there. Why has educational reform failed? And we'll elaborate on some of these more as we go in further into the course and in the course materials. Don't want to pause too long on them. There's quite a list here, but some of the things that have caused educational reform to fail on a national level are certainly the complexity of it. As we've looked at these other countries, Many of them are much smaller than we are. Many of them are more able to focus on the task at hand because of their size. There have been some misplaced focus on some of the things that we've done. Those have been, in many ways, influenced by non-educational forces. Lack of clarity on the results. We certainly continue to debate that notion. Are we for vocational education? Are we against it? Are we, for equal standards for all? We just don't have a clarity of what the results should be. We've just not persevered, and we've failed to appreciate and attend to the change process. So, we've all seen some of these local changes fail. And here's some reasons. And again, I won't elaborate on these tonight, but just to put them out on the table, why changes or why reforms failed. Change moved too fast. It moved too slowly, lacked leadership. It relied too heavily on the leadership of a strong principal, and we didn't have that. Change was too big, and we tried to attack too much at once. It was too small and didn't attack enough. Change was top down without buy-in from the faculty. Change may have been bottom up without the support of the administration at the central office. We celebrated too soon. We didn't celebrate the gains that we had made. Schools may have been unwilling to change. Schools embraced everything that came along that flavor of the month. Leaders failed to develop a critical level of support before initiating the change. And leaders wanted everybody on board before they began to implement. Most teachers believe that schools are doing as well as possible given the problems we face in society and the lack of parental involvement. DeFore states that. I think that's all of these problems that I've listed and challenges that I've listed to the change have been the context for where we've seen PLCs begin to emerge. And we really can't decide on what needs to be reformed. Is it student behavior? Is it parental involvement and support? Is it the faculty morale? Is it pedagogy? Is it on and on and on? We focus on too many things at one time. And so, our experts believe that almost all education innovations are going to fail in the long term. There's researchers out there that look at education reform and say, in the final analysis, very little gets done and very little will continue. So, if our reforms are to work, we've got two questions that have got to be addressed. What have the past school improvement efforts, why have they not achieved their results? And why have they not why have, and I've got that one down there twice, but the notion that, why have our school improvement efforts not achieved their intended results? And why have they not been sustained, as it should say? Why have we not built in the characteristics of sustaining those changes that we're trying to implement? What are we reforming from is the question. Back to what was mentioned earlier, that we have a kind of a manufacturing kind of mentality, a sense in our countries. We're doing a huge business in our schools, creating future citizens. We've looked at that part of our world in terms of manufacturing and being able to recreate that, but we've not been able to do that, in our public schools. And it's woefully inadequate for meeting our national education goals. We've got to abandon that model and move toward more of a research-based model that really is back to that definition that we talked about the first night between reform and change. We've got to come up with a way to change the state, the culture, a transformative change, I guess, is the best way that we have. And this, factory model, this manufacturing model won't get us there. The most promising strategy for this school improvement is developing the ability within our school personnel to function as professional learning communities. I think these videos that we've watched about these other countries certainly set that context. I think somewhere at the heart of what's happened in Shanghai and Finland and Singapore and these countries, there has been a professionalization of the job of being a teacher. And certainly the work that is going on, if you watch these videos and watch the vignettes about these teachers and working with their mentors and their co-teachers and fellow teachers, there is a sense of a learning community. What is it I'm doing? How am I doing it? Is it making a difference with children? What are ways that I can do it better? We see that, you'll see that in Shanghai as one of those where there's almost maybe to an extreme of creating master teachers, creating mastery designed lessons, and teachers are expected to follow those recipes, follow those blueprints that are developed that is kind of contrary to maybe who we are. We said earlier in conversations that several of you had about the context that we have now. Our teachers don't want anybody to tell them how to improve. They don't want to have that discussion. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them don't. They believe themselves to be the experts. They're not lifelong learners, and I think that's kind of an interesting maybe it's an oxymoron or a dichotomy, whatever we want to call it, that we're expecting our children to do one thing and become lifelong learners, yet it's hard for us to do that as the educators. And so I think that's all set this context for the reform that we're going to use as an example, and that's professional learning communities. Certainly it's not the only one. The purpose of looking at it in this course is really to take it as an example, kind of dissect it and look at the moving parts of it. But I do think it's critical to seeing our country reform until we can kind of have the conversations that we need to have around common tables in our schools, where we can talk about learning and where we can talk about instruction, not doing necessarily just a book study and not just coming in and necessarily doing the look at data that we need to do, but comprehensively looking at what we're doing in classrooms and working with the best of what we have, the best of teachers that we have, and creating true learning communities. Can we begin to see the kinds of changes that we want to see happen? As we move forward, you're going to be looking at some of these things: shared mission, vision, and values, collective inquiry, collaborative teams, action orientation and experimentation, continuous improvement and results orientation. Those are the pieces that we'll see as we move forward. And if every school and every teacher did what is it that we want every school and every teacher to do so that we create reform that succeeds? Is that PLCs? I don't know, but I do think it's a good example to look at. I don't think we've reached our full speed on PLCs, and again, already some places are moving away from them. But as we look in a bit, we're going to have class presentations on each of these. Certainly introduction to PLCs, and then building the foundation, making the shift, changing the culture, focus on learning, the leadership roles required, and the impact of PLCs on teaching, and then training and professional development. These components of this reform we'll talk about over a few weeks here in the middle of the course as you lead these presentations. So, going through that rather quickly tonight, I understand, went through it very quickly. but PLCs are an important component of, I think, where we are as schools now and our ability to move forward with some of these reforms. I think clearly the notions that we have about trust, as we've talked about those, the notions we've talked about in these videos about professionalism and teacher growth and teacher change, teacher improvement are there. I think some of the ways that we deal with children who are experiencing difficulties are certainly dependent upon our ability to use PLCs to grow in our ability to deal with them and some of the problems that we're experiencing. So I hope we'll find that to be helpful as we move forward with the course. Are there comments that you would have or questions you would have right now about PLCs and moving forward with them? Again, I've gone through that rather hurriedly, but I think just my intention tonight is kind of give us an introduction of and bring what we talked about that first night with a history context up to where we are with PLCs. Okay, if not, hang on, let me pull up our tasks real quickly. Hang on just a second. Right here, so that we can talk about those. Cancel there. Can you, hang on. There we go. Takes us just a minute. Hopefully you can see this week's tasks. The tasks are not that heavy, much work during the week. I do, and I didn't have it on here, but I do want you to watch the Shanghai video, and I'll add that to this tomorrow. We've got some reading. You need to be, if you haven't already read TAC, the second chapter, you need to do that and be moving on into the third, fourth, and fifth chapters of that. We'll look at some characteristics of educational reforms next week, and then we'll also talk about needs assessments in preparation for the work you'll be doing on your end of course or your final project for the course, your artifact, the needs assessment, and your school reform or system reform plan. So we'll talk about that next week. Hopefully you're beginning to work and read into for your particular section and doing some other research on your particular topic for a presentation starting in 3 weeks. Watch the remaining country videos. If you got time to watch them all, I think that's good. It gives you a good context. I want you at the very least to watch Shanghai and maybe one or two others, just so you get that flavor. One of the other reasons I want you to watch these videos is because the work you'll be doing on reforms, you may get some ideas in these videos about things that you want to study in your reforms. With that in mind, I want you to, by next Friday, or by this Friday, I would like for you to at least email me the topic of your reform paper, the one that you'll be doing mid-semester, so that I'll know that you've started on that, and we can get lined up for doing those. I also want to make sure that those reform papers that everybody is not doing the same topic, and so those are for October the 13th, and so you have slightly more than a month, so you need to be getting going on that reform paper. I don't think it's an unwise choice if you can tie the reform paper topic to the reform system reform notion that you want to do for your artifact. I've been asked that question. I think that's certainly a wise choice. If you can do that, doesn't have to be. If you want to do them on two separate things, you can. But if you can tie whatever your reform is on the reform paper to that final project, that's a good thing. That kind of helps you out. And then you should be thinking about your focus for your system reform plan that'll be due at the end of the semester. Okay. Are there questions tonight? I know we covered a good bit of material. Appreciate the PowerPoints that you've done and the presentations you've done tonight. You did a good job on those. and appreciate you sharing about those countries. I think it's a little more meaningful if you take one than we just watch those videos straight out. So, anything that we need to discuss tonight? Okay, quickly, thumbs up, thumbs down, just to get a sense of how we did on. And again, I apologize on not being an expert on Zoom yet. I'll get there, but did it work okay for everybody tonight? Any comments on that? So get some feedback there.
Thumbs up, good for the first night.
Okay, any problems?
No major problems.
Okay. One thing, and a couple things about that. I will convert the video. It takes a little bit longer for this video to convert. Normally I will, when we were doing WebEx, I would post that video like tonight before I leave the office and have it for you that quickly. It will take a couple of hours for this video to convert to an MP4 file, and so I won't be able to post those, with our fingers crossed that the recording went okay. I won't be able to post those until the next morning. So don't be looking for it tonight. I'll be looking for it the next day on that. And if I understand correctly, and I believe I do, we will use the same link each week for class. And so you already have that URL for this class. That should be the same URL that we'll use for the whole semester, because I've set this up as a reoccurring class every Tuesday night. So you'll just use that same one. I'll send you that link again and a reminder next week, but you should be able to use that again, the same one each week. So you can just click on that. So I believe you should maybe have, if you downloaded it correctly, you should have a Zoom icon on your computer, and you maybe can just go right to that and click on it. But it will be the same course number, course ID, class ID that we'll use for each class. Okay? Well, I believe, let me check my list one more time and make sure. I believe that's everything we had for tonight. I hope all of you have a good rest of the week, and I look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday evening. Have a good night.
Have a good night, Doc.
Thanks. Bye.